Clinical engineers, biomedical equipment technicians, and healthcare professionals from around the world. Welcome to the GCEA webinar. Today we gather here to address pressing issues and advancements in the ever-evolving field of clinical engineering and healthcare technology management. In today's session, we will be discussing benchmarking, an important topic and a valuable tool for clinical engineers. My name is Dr. Richard Gonzalez. I'm the president of the College of Biomedical Equipment Technology headquartered in San Antonio, Texas. In my role at the college, as well as the work I do with my esteemed colleagues at GCEA, I have the privilege of working with and learning from many remarkable clinical engineers and thought leaders from around the world, including my friend, Al Gresh. Al serves as the Vice President of HDM Consulting at Phoenix Data Systems and as an instructor at the College of Biomedical Equipment Technology. The important work he is leading is informed by more than 40 years of experience, serving in a wide variety of roles, up to and including senior clinical engineering roles in large healthcare organizations in the United States. With a wealth of experience and a distinguished career spanning decades, he has dedicated his life to the betterment of healthcare systems through innovative approaches and an unparalleled commitment to the industry he serves. As president of the College of Biomedical Equipment Technology, I've had the pleasure of working closely with Al, witnessing firsthand his commitment to excellence and his passion for elevating clinical engineering best practices. He has been instrumental in shaping the landscape of this field. Throughout his career, he has spearheaded various transformative initiatives, focusing on advancing patient safety, optimizing healthcare technology utilization, and promoting cross among professionals. His expertise has been invaluable in shaping policy frameworks, developing standards, and establishing best practices that have driven the field forward. Today, Mr. Gresh will share his insights on the continually evolving role of clinical engineering. This webinar series serves as a platform for us to come together, exchange ideas, and learn from the remarkable expertise of industry leaders like Al. So, without further ado, it is my honor to extend a warm welcome to Mr. Gresh, a visionary leader who continues to make significant contributions to our field. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're listening in from. In this session, we'll be covering clinical engineering benchmarking. I'm Al Gresh, Vice President of HDM Consulting with Phoenix Data Systems. I have over 40 years of experience working in the industry, having run a large in-house clinical engineering program in one health system and running a capital supply chain group at another. I'm also an adjunct professor at the College of Biomedical Equipment Technology in San Antonio, Texas, in the U.S. So without further ado, let's jump in. Over the years, the clinical engineering community is engaged in debates around benchmarking. It's something that we've tried to get a handle on for a long time without much progress toward consensus. Organizations like AMI and ECRI have offered benchmarking tools that are not widely used, largely because HDM programs had difficulty providing consistent data, and literally how every organization sets up their data is a little bit different. So there's really historically hadn't been any standards around that. So Amy finally pulled the plug on their benchmarking solutions, and ECRI still struggles to obtain membership in the program with consistent data. But when the ECRI still has it, but they look at average annual PM hours by device type, average annual CM or corrective maintenance hours by device type, average PM intervals by device type. Like I said, AMI benchmarking, they put a lot of time and effort into trying to build that, but it just wouldn't get done. Truven is an organization that has Health Analytics Action IO operational performance improvement solution, but Truven is not what I would consider a clinical engineering industry specific solution. So what happened in 2019 as a result of those considerations A group of leading CMMS providers met informally at the AMI conference and along with representatives from a small number of HTM thought leaders, and looked at the feasibility of creating a set of standards for CMMS codes that would hopefully remove some of the obstacles of getting consistent data from different clinical engineering departments that could eventually benchmark the data. And here's a list of the companies that participated. At the time I was at Accruent. Phoenix Data Systems, the company I work for now, was a participant in that as well. And the purpose of the meeting was to discuss the feasibility of a collaborative effort and a new approach to standardization. The group agreed that there was value in developing a standard set of codes, and once developed, each company would use them as recommended best practice when doing any new software implementations. The group also acknowledged that these efforts represented no competitive advantage to any one of the companies. So it certainly was worthwhile doing, since it would bring immense value to the industry as a whole. The first set of codes that was developed was the failure codes. The reason that group of codes was selected, it was felt that the industry, if the industry understood how things failed and could readily report on them, we could also optimize our planned maintenance programs to potentially reduce failures. The other reason was that they would be important in supporting alternative equipment maintenance programs. And so here is that list, and you can see that there's an option or a code, and then the definition for that code, and then some examples of things that would fall into those failure codes. There's some additional codes. You'll see that those that are checked were PM-related failures, and no failure associated with work, WO equals work order. But again, each of these has a definition and examples of how to use that particular code. The second set of codes that group worked on was work order types or request code. Similarly, they came with descriptions, clear descriptions of what they were. So you could see here, like for the planned maintenance, there's the code abbreviation plus some aliases or synonyms for what you might call that in your CMMS, and then a description of what that is and how a particular code should be used, or in some instances, what it should not be used for. So you can see here, there's planned maintenance, corrective maintenance, training for HTM staff, support or training for users, for a project, administrative work. Again, each of these with a clear description of what they are. Cybersecurity efforts that include mitigation, breach response, or remediation, and then recall and alert management, and then incident investigation and incoming inspection. The ones that are checked are maintenance-related work order types, yeah, that was the first two efforts that this group put together. There are white papers available for each of those two different code sets and how to use them. If you're an AMI member, those are free from AMI. AMI is the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, if you're not familiar. I'm hoping that those efforts continue and that all the codes are, the standards for all codes are created. But whether you decide to leverage those codes and adopt those codes, The things that you need to do is come up with a clear set of codes with requests or with definitions, um, and that's for all codes. So you can see here that for planned maintenance, it has a definition of where that should be used. And I can tell you when I did this work, and this really was the biggest obstacle for me to have meaningful data that I could report on, but also made it difficult for us to benchmark even internally because I had over 150 codes in the system. What that meant is I could have 10 different technicians doing the exact same work and potentially recording it, documenting it in different ways, and that's not helpful. And so we cleaned that up, came up with a very finite set of request or work order type codes with clear definitions. And then took that to the next step where for each of the request codes, there was a very finite list of acceptable result codes with definitions. Um, and we did that for every single code, and that was set up in our CMMS to come up as drop downs. So these were the only ones that were available. If you had an administrative work order, these were the only result codes that were available. Corrective maintenance work order, these four were the only acceptable result code. Right? And again, each of these had clear definitions on how they were to be used. And similarly with fault codes. So you could see for each corrective, if for a corrective maintenance work order, you had this finite list of potential fault codes with clear definitions. And then we trained our technicians on how to use these codes, make sure that everybody was documenting in a consistent manner. Why is that so important? Well, once you have consistent data, meaning that your team is documenting everything that they do and are doing it consistently, you'll have the ability to create defensible manning or staffing analyses and actually get to analyze what you're doing and whether or not you're doing it as well as you can be doing it. So here's a sample of that manning data where we have a list of active items in the inventory for each of these device categories, how much time it takes on an annual basis to support that, and then just the math multiplying those out, how much time we would need to support those devices on an annual basis. And why is that important? Well, every year at budget time, we would present this annual manning analysis where for each of our different regions, for each of our different modality groupings, we would determine what our net adds were. So how many devices did we retire, and how much time was associated with those retirements? How many devices did we add, and how much time was associated with each of those adds? And then after adding all of that up, we'd come up with how many additional staff we needed. Often there's the assumption that every time you retire a device or every time you buy a new device, the same number of devices retired, and that's never the case. I know in my organization we averaged 10% inventory increase year over year. So we would come up with the total hours per year and then divide that by of a full-time equivalent, how many of that FTE, how many hours of that FTE are spent actually working on equipment. If you use 2080 as that divisor, you're cheating yourself because no one works 100% of their time on fixing equipment, doing planned maintenance. There are other things to do as well. You could factor that in, and then from that you can come up with the FTEs that you would need to add in any given year. If you're using an organization sanctioned productivity measure or metric, then it's important to call that out as well because otherwise they're just going to assume that you can absorb that additional inventory. So, what are the conclusions and recommendations? Come up with a standardized set of codes, find them clearly, whether you use the AAMI standardized codes or develop your own set of standardized codes. And again, the key here is to define them clearly and then to train your staff to make sure that they're all using them the same way. And then enforce documentation standards and data integrity. I often tell people, do not tell your people to document X number of hours per day. If you do that, you're going to get that number, and it likely won't mean very much because people are going to just win whatever they need in order to hit that number. Alternatively, I told people to just document what you do, document everything that you do, and if you don't hit a certain number, that's fine. We'll figure out how to keep you busy for if that's a consistent if you're running consistently short of hours, we'll find more work for you to do. But you want people to document the truth and not have to add. So enforce those documentation standards and data integrity. And I would recommend that you benchmark internally first. Those things that we called out that the ECRI biomedical benchmarking does. You can do those same things. Average PM hours, average corrective maintenance hours by device type. And each and every one of us has a person on our team that's a rock star. And, you can sort of use that as a truth table to see if what you're at as a whole is within a standard deviation of that number. But once you have those numbers, you can determine what good looks like, and then as long as people are within a standard deviation of that number, you'll know that you're in pretty good shape. And then if you find an effective benchmarking tool outside of your organization, or if you have others in your area that you can benchmark against, at least you'll know that you're comparing apples to apples. Implement a cost of service ratio measure. If you don't know what that is, it's the all-in cost of supporting a device or a group of devices divided by the value or acquisition cost of those devices. And if you think about that in terms of contracted services, they typically runs anywhere between 10 and 15%. So if you buy $1 million CP, typically that's going to cost you between $100,000 and $150,000 annually to support that. That's what your cost of service rate would be for that device. In our industry, it's typically accepted that if you're around 5 to 6% cost of service ratio, you're doing pretty well. So I always recommend that that's one of the metrics that you ought to be looking at. I know there's a lot of debate about that, and a lot of discussion around, well, what can we use as the value? Should it be list price? Should it be the actual price? And my answer to that is always pick one. It doesn't matter so much what that beginning number is, but pick one, stick with it, and then work to improve year over year. The other measure that I find critically important is customer satisfaction measures. Because in my mind, if you nail those two things, if you work constantly toward reducing your cost of service ratio and improving your customer satisfaction, everything else takes care of itself. And then, as I said, choose a measurement methodology and stick with it. Don't worry so much about what the beginning number is. Just work toward getting better year over year. Here's an example of a one of the questions on a clinical engineering client satisfaction survey. This one happened to be on the quality of communication. And you can see this year it was had a mean of 3.88 on a 1 to 5 scale, and it breaks it down into either excellent, very good, good, fair, poor, or no experience. But what's important for you to look at here is look at where this started. In the first year that we did this, it was at 3.51. And we instituted measures to improve on that communication regarding equipment status, and every year we improved on that score. And while we were continuing to improve, the point here is to never be satisfied. And you can see that the number of excellent responses went from 18% up 33% in that span, and that's really the key. There is you want to achieve excellence, and that's how you do it, is measuring how you're doing and benchmarking it, even if it's not against someone else. Benchmark it against yourself. Here's examples of some of the other things that we measured. We looked at cost savings and cost avoidances. We looked at cost of service ratio, like I said. And you'll see here just an example of just the first quarter and then the year-end totals. And then on the far right is a variance from the target. And then we had a column there with benchmarks, something that we wanted to try to achieve, and then tracked it month by month to make sure that we were working toward achieving that. And then anything that was in green was where we actually did achieve that target, and anything that's in the pink or the light red there is where we didn't, but then we had action plans developed to remedy that, to try and achieve those benchmarks going forward. Some other things we looked at is the mix of repair hours and corrective versus planned, and trying to get as much of a balance in that as we could. And I talked earlier about evaluating those fault codes and looking for how things were failing. And here's a perfect example of where we did exactly that. We invested an additional 135 hours in planned maintenance and achieved a reduction in corrective maintenance hours of over 1,500 hours as well. So we looked at the total number of requests for service, what was completed in-house versus outsourced, service that was called in after hours. We looked at our productivity and tracked that monthly, response time, both by our in-house personnel and vendors, and then lastly, the customer satisfaction. But again, how you measure it, don't get so hung up on the details of that. Pick a reasonable measure that you can defend and stick with it and work toward improvement year over year. So that's wraps up this session. I want to thank you all for joining, and hopefully you'll take steps for doing meaningful benchmarking in your organization.